like to watch women doing little domestic chores.
You came to the right town.
In 1972, The Stepford Wives was published, a novel that would bring a lexicon to the English language. Written by Ira Levin, who is also known for his novels Rosemary's Baby and The Boys from Brazil, The Stepford Wives is satirical feminist horror. Adapted twice in 1975 and 2004, the novel and its 1975 adaptation touch on men and women's fears and how those fears are different and where they intersect. The novel and original film were made during second wave feminism, and while the 2004 remake might have overshadowed the 1975 adaptation, it didn't outdo it. With each passing decade, The Stepford Wives remains an important work, a novel that doesn't quell women's fears, it validates them. Hey, hello, hi, how are you? I'm Ainsley, and this is the Quiet Riot. If you are new here, this is where we dive a little deeper into film, television, and media. And today we are going to talk about The Stepford Wives, a novel by Ira Levin and its 1975 adaptation. There is a 2004 adaptation, but I've never actually seen it, and nor have I ever had the desire to watch it. But if you are interested in my thoughts on that, especially in comparison to the novel, let me know in the comments below. Where you can watch the film and read the book will be in the description box, along with my resources and where else you can find The Quiet Riot. The 1975 film does not make many changes from the source material. There are a few here and there that I personally believe translates a lot better in visual form, where certain things might translate better through word, and one of those changes is where we start. So in the film, we start with the couple moving out of the city. We actually start in their apartment, and Joanna Eberhardt is in there alone, and she ends up leaving, and so we kind of got a bit of a New York City landscape. The children are in the back, and we witness a guy carrying a naked lady, as one of the kids call it, but it is actually a mannequin. And Joanna takes a picture of this, and this is where we kind of we get to know her passion for photography. Now, this particular scene does not happen in Levin's book. We actually begin the book in Stepford, Connecticut. They're already there and setting up their house, and the welcome wagon lady who writes for the newspaper there is asking some questions. She hands Joanna cleaning products and anything else they may need in the house while asking questions, and this is where Joanna also mentions dabbling in women's lib.
I told you I messed a little bit with women's lib in New York.
Didn't we all?
While in New York or while in college. And this thing is not mentioned until later, and the welcome wagon lady, and she doesn't have as big of a moment. And even though she's not like a super big character or anything, this is kind of the moment that both Joanna and us as an audience know that there might be a bit of a difference there in just the way Joanna kind of reacts and converses with this lady. Ira Levin wrote the original novel following his divorce and based Stepford on his former home in Connecticut. He was inspired by Alvin Toffler's book Future Shock on domestic robots. Joanna is a sympathetic protagonist who is able to maintain her identity while going against the norms of Stepford. Joanna being someone who is really out of her element. She's more of a city girl, and she comes to Connecticut with her husband and her children. Even though she is a family woman, she has her passions, she has her own dreams that she wants to follow. Her being a feminist, I don't think nearly matters as much when you consider what she's going up against in terms of Stepford. She wouldn't even have to mention that. It's just the fact that she loves a photographer. She wants to be able to work as a full-time photographer and do that while also maybe sometimes cooking dinner and raising her children. But she'd be raising her children all the time, because that doesn't just stop. An inspiration for Jordan Peele, The Stepford Wives is an early example of suburban horror. In the 1970s, the burbs, as some people may call it, were not new. They were, however, expanding. More and more middle-class white women were refusing to conform to societal pressure. They were entering the workforce that working-class women, black women, indigenous women, and women of color were already used to. What all these women had in common were the daily expectations of the patriarchy. Even if they looked a little different, those expectations were still present. And before 1970, there were plenty of women in the workforce. Women in the 40s took the jobs men left behind during World War II, and in the 1950s, with the expansion of suburban life, this had many middle-class women, middle-class white women in particular, returning to the kitchen. Not everyone was happy with this arrangement, and there were many women who began to protest these conditions. And as more things began to change, men grew tired of women's personal expectations. Those who lose out tend to retaliate, and I guess we can be glad that The Stepford Wives is just a fictional novel and not real life. Or is it? Second wave feminism certainly had its faults. A big one being that it centered middle-class white women, particularly within certain groups. In the novel, there is a moment where Joanna is looking through her photographs and she notices one of the black women trying to hail a cab. He is passed over by a white man. Joanna here is using a black man's experience of racism for her own gain, and it really doesn't matter how she views this in her head, if it even occurred to her, but it speaks to her own privilege. She has that privilege. The novel did a good job at presenting Joanna as far more than an expectation of feminism. It showed that feminists can engage in harmful behaviors, and despite her fears being realized, she herself has benefited from the fears and realities of others. This isn't particularly present in the film, and I maybe wish that they could have focused on that a little bit more. And it's hard for me to say whether or not those things are a lot easier to not explain but present in a book. And I think here the main focus is the women versus the men. And I just think this was something that the novel definitely did better in terms of making the character of Joanna a little bit layered and recognizing her faults as a human being. That would be a lot more typical of a novel now, hopefully at least, but it was interesting to see how that was presented, and it wasn't much of an expansion upon that. It was just a little moment, and I think particularly for a modern audience, that is why this book can read so well. In her 2022 article, Suburban Living Did Turn Women into Robots, why feminist horror novel The Stepford Wives is still relevant 50 years on, Michelle Arrow writes, not only a satire of male fears of women's liberation, but a savage view of heterosexual marriage. In this telling, a man would rather kill his wife and replace her with a robot than commit to equality and recognize her as a whole person. I'm quite surprised that Levin's novel and the film aren't as popular as some other films of the period, and while it is particular to the women's liberation movement and feminism of the 1970s, I do think that the film and book is very reminiscent of how feminism can be viewed as harmful to men's way of life, particularly men who want a certain ways of life, who want what they grew up expecting or hoping for. And from a 2025 perspective, we can see that there is a lot of young men and older men as well who expected a certain way of life or hoped for one and didn't end up getting that. And we are also seeing that not only in the way they act, but also in the way their significant others do as well. Even in areas where equality was being fought for, women still had to fight for a seat at the table. We can look at this all throughout history, particularly within the suffragette movement, where we had women fighting for a right to vote and other rights, and you had black women and other women of color being left behind, and that can be seen in the abolitionist movement as well, where black men were wanting to move forward but wanted to leave women behind. And this happened through the decades, and this is a problem that we still have. And we see that women can also be considered second-class citizens to men. It's a lot about the expectations that maybe we have, but we don't even recognize until we're faced with those, or we may not realize that we are perpetuating some of the same harmful behaviors that other people have. And this can go through the decades, regardless of race, gender, sexuality. But it's something that does happen, and it's happening now, and it also was happening in the 1970s. When the 1975 film adaptation was released, it received mixed reviews. Big names in the feminist movement denounced the film. Betty Friedan, who wrote The Feminist Mystique, was not fond of the film. She saw it as a ripoff of the women's movement. In the New York Times article covering the screening of the film to feminist movie, Linda Arkin said of the film, "I couldn't believe the film. It dumps on everyone, women, men, suburbia. It confirms every fear we've ever had about the battle of the sexes, and it says there is no way for people to get together and eat humans alive." While some feminists looked down on the film, others praised it. Gail Green said of the film, "I loved it. Those men were like a lot of the men I've known in my life." One of the things that the Stepford Wives does very, very well is it paints these husbands as good husbands, particularly with Joanna's husband. And he seems that he's very loving and supportive of his wife. And he doesn't make this decision, the decisions that he makes in both the novel and film, particularly easy. You can see there are moments where he is thinking about it, and he's very apprehensive to go forth with it. But it also kind of plays into that idea of how dangerous it can be when men get together and nobody really challenges each other. And that can be said for any group. If you hear something, say something, so to speak. Speak up, be an ally, be a cool dude, be a cool person, and speak up if your buddies are thinking, hey, let's turn your wife into a robot. As Joanna begins to learn more about Stepford, she fears that her big dreams and passions will stay dreams. As a modern viewer, I share many of Joanna's fears. While they may not mirror my own completely, especially being that I was born in 1990 and it's 2025 now, I do find that today's political climate has instilled in me a fear that I've never really had before. This fear that Joanna has, one that will stop her from being the woman that she is a fear that I myself have had, and it's something that I have especially now, and in seeing certain things women are going through, but that our women are also putting themselves through, whether it be through social media or in the way they present themselves on the internet. I obviously can't speak to what happens when the camera stops rolling, but it does make me scared when it comes to the expectations that then men and boys will hold. Right now, there's a big trend going on of the trad wife, which stands for traditional wife, I suppose. And apparently these women are engaging in some traditional behaviors. But the truth is that a lot of these people are bringing in loads and loads of money. We've got Ballerina Farm, and we've got many others who are bringing in a lot of money through social media and through other ventures. So they are working women. And that differs a lot from the Stepford wife, which is meant to be someone who doesn't really bring in money. A Stepford wife has become something that people refer to when they are often discussing a woman who doesn't have a personality outside of the home. She is a stay-at-home mom, she cooks and she cleans, and that is pretty much it. She doesn't have much of a personality or life of her own. And this differs quite from the traditional or trad wife, but I do find that the trad wife is also very harmful to women and to men as well, and can also put a lot of women and girls in harm's way in terms of how certain men or boys may react to that. Joanna sees as the women around her are dressed in more modest dress while still showing off a near perfect figure. She loves to cook, clean, and take care of her husband. She doesn't talk back or engage in politics. Equality isn't something she thinks about. In the novel, the women are dressed in a Playboy bunny outfit, the black stereotypical one of the days of the early days, and like I think the Playboy Bunny Club ones, one that you would have saw Gloria Steinem in. And I think this works a lot for the novel, but I do think the change that was made for the film to dress them in a very like mix of a 70s pattern aesthetic and look, while having it be a lot more like have that slightly Victorian modesty with some big hats, and you're not showing some cleavage. And it gives the idea that all the sexy stuff is meant for the husband, it's meant for the home, where you go out to do some shopping, like that's your day on the town, and you are wearing something that's a lot more modest and that none of the other men are gonna ogle at unless the husband says okay. While Joanna is a woman of her time and represents middle-class women, a group that is becoming smaller every second, we are still able to relate to her struggles. Joanna is a wife and mother who hopes to grow her career as a photographer. Her once supportive husband has been listening to other men and is taking part in their chauvinistic ideas. Because of this, Joanna and her husband Albert begin to drift apart. But unbeknownst to Joanna, her husband begins to formulate other plans with the help of his new friends. The Stepford Wives is a horror story, and it's something that relies heavily on both the fears of men and women, their particular anxieties that they were having within the 1970s. But this isn't something that is particular to that period. While the certain feelings that may have been happening at the time and the specific execution of both the novel and the film were very representative of the 1970s, a lot of these fears and anxieties still exist today and existed far before the 1970s. Anytime somebody goes to experience to gain equality or to be able to have the same experiences, life experiences that someone else has, the privileges of that exists within every single decade. And people who already have those privileges, already have those experiences, feel as if someone is encroaching on them. And one of their main fears is that without that, they will no longer have those. They will be treated in the same way that they had treated them. And with women gaining a lot more power within the 1970s in larger groups, and now things were changing for middle class women as well, there is this sense of fear that, oh, the women are going to talk and things aren't going to be good for us. Every man is going to have those feelings and those experiences, whether we're talking the 1950s, 70s, or the 2020s. But even with that being said, we're also talking about the way in which change tends to come some backlash. And there is a lot of backlash that's been happening lately, and I'm speaking as an American, but I know this isn't only an American issue, where people are pushing towards equality and there is a pushback to that. And we're seeing it happen with our political sphere. Be careful and recognize that someone else's privileges and people working towards equality, if you see that as harmful to you, you're the problem. And who's the problem in Stepford Wives? It's not the women, it's not Joanna, it's the men. And I also find it really funny that not funny, haha, but funny, weird, that the guy in charge worked for like Disney and worked for Disney's animatronics. It's kind of scary. One of my favorite parts in the film is when Joanna is sitting among the men for like the men's they're having a little meeting, a little impromptu meeting at her house. The guy is sitting there and he's doing her sketches. He ends up like giving one up to her, and I guess he did sketches. I don't know if it was for film or what, but this moment and kind of we get to see so much of her face and her reactions to things, and she's obviously a very strong-willed person, but she's in this room full of these men who, when she's talking, they're not really taking any of her ideas, they're not taking anything into account, and it's kind of scary to see this because as I say as a woman, but I know like if you're ever you experienced anything like that where you're the only one in a room, which really goes into speak to something that Jordan Peele had said when discussing Get Out, and thinking about how, oh, like if you're a woman going into an entire like room of men, I can imagine that feels very similar to me walking into like a bank with just everyone's white or something like that. And that's a sense of anxiety that I felt while watching that scene, especially with like you have people talking back and forth to each other, and her really not having a voice in that, and somebody's just kind of watching her, and she like is flattered by that because she knows who this person is, but unfortunately it's not a good thing. The horror present in the Stepford Wives is one that is all too real. In 2025, we are seeing, as both men and women, harmful rhetoric that puts women in unhealthy and dangerous situations. The environments they inhabit are meant to be traditional. That tradition, unfortunately, puts marginalized people in harmful positions. Sometimes when I scroll past videos of trad wives, I feel like Joanna walking in the supermarket in Stepford. When I come upon a clip of an alpha male podcast, I feel like I've entered a familiar place, but one I don't want to inhabit. The Stepford Wives is a cult favorite, and a reminder why women choose the bear. Thank you so much for taking your time to sit and listen, watch, however you enjoy the Quiet Riot. I'm really glad that you decided to stick it through this video. I do have a typed out version that you can find on my Substack, which will be in the description box below. Again, that's where you can find my resources, where else you can find the Quiet Riots, and where you can watch and read the Stepford Wives. I do plan on doing a video on Little Women adaptations soon as well. I'm currently working on that. That one is just taking a little bit more time than I expected. I will also be doing a video on the 1960 adaptation of Lord of the Flies. So that's kind of where I'm at and what I'm working on at the moment. And I do have quite a few things planned as well for the future, but if you ever have any things that you would like to share with me, ideas, things you'd like to see on the channel, please feel free to let me know in the comments. Not only do I love hearing from you, the comments really help with the algorithm and pushing this video out there. So if you also feel so inclined, give this video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that bell to be notified every single time I post. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!